Well, good morning. I'm Dave Sivers. I'm a local crime fiction writer. I write the Archer and Baines series set right here in Aylesbury Vale, and a new series with D.I. Nathan Quarles set just across the Hertfordshire border in Hemel Hempstead and surrounding areas. But I'm not here to talk about me today. I'm delighted to welcome the very lovely and very talented Cara Hunter. Cara is the author of the Sunday Times best-selling crime novels featuring D.I. Adam Fawley and his Oxford-based crime team. Her books have sold over 1 million copies in the UK alone. They've been translated into 23 languages so far, and every Cara Hunter novel has been a #1 bestseller. Her first novel, Close to Home, sold over 500,000 copies. It was a Richard and Judy Book Club pick and was shortlisted for Crime Book of the Year in the British Book Awards 2019. Her fourth novel, No Way Out, was selected by the Sunday Times as one of the 100 best crime novels since 1945. And her fifth book, the current one, The Whole Truth, published this year, is a Richard and Judy summer pick for 2021. The TV rights to the series have been acquired by the Fremantle Group, and she lives in Oxford on a street not unlike those featured in her books. The Sunday Times has described her books as a hugely popular series. Jane Casey, who some of you might remember seeing at BeaconLit a few years ago, said, "Hunter moves through the gears like a Formula One driver, utterly chilling and hugely impressive." She's cringing now. And Peter James, the author of the Roy Grace series, described her work as a real gripper of a read. So, something to live up to, I think, there, Cara.
Set the bar a bit high.
First of all, I'd like to ask you, what's been the impact of lockdown on your writing?
Yes, it's a question every writer gets, I think. I suppose like a lot of people who aren't writers, I suppose one of the first things you thought, or at least hoped, was, I'm going to have so much more time. I'm going to be able to do all the things that I wouldn't normally be able to do. I'll be able to concentrate. And actually, I haven't met a single writer yet who found lockdown actually helped them. Everybody found that lockdown was a real problem with concentration. It shouldn't have been. It's all counterintuitive to think that. Yeah, you'd have thought everything was quieter, you could just get on with stuff. But actually, it was all the things that were absent that were the problem. So you couldn't go out, you couldn't meet your friends, you couldn't go on holiday. And it was all those sort of missings in your life that I think started to become really problematic. And I found it tough going. I mean, I was lucky the first lockdown when, of course, the weather was nice and we hadn't been doing it for very long, so there was sort of a novelty value in it. I was finishing The Whole Truth, so the book was pretty much there. So I was able to really just edit, and that was broadly okay. But since about last September, I've been writing book 6, and that was just like Groundhog Day. I mean, that was just every single day was the same, and the weather was getting worse, and it was just like you couldn't see an end to it. And I know a lot of people have had the same experience in different occupations and jobs, but certainly, lockdown, I would never want to do it again. I'm sure I'm very much of everybody else.
I can totally relate to that as well. And you have sort of ups and downs, don't you? Whereas, I mean, I wrote and published the whole of Archer and Baines book 6 during lockdown.
Oh, well done.
And it flew off the pen. But sort of finishing the book before that and making progress with the one since has been a real struggle. And it's up there, isn't it?
Yeah. I know people who said if they get 300 words done a day, they consider themselves, to have achieved something.
Huge success,
so,
yeah.
It has been a bit like that.
And are you one of those writers like me who's always been a scribbler? Or did the urge to write come a little bit later?
I think I was a scribbler when I was a little girl. I loved books right from very, very small. I can't remember not being able to read. And I loved English at school. I did English at university. So the words thing has always been, very close to my heart. But then I went into other jobs. I went into the city to start with, and I was doing very long days, and there just wasn't the time, really. I always remember, of course, that extremely famous quote from Virginia Woolf about you need a room of your own, but you also need time of your own. And I think if you have a busy life, work long hours, or if you have a family, I don't, but people who do, finding the time, that's the thing, just to get clear headspace and to be able to devote the time to it. So I didn't really start thinking about writing until I went freelance, and then a freelance career is a bit of a feast and famine. If anyone works freelance, they'll know what I mean. You get too much in one go, and then you suddenly got nothing at all. So it was actually a real good filler, to start writing, because it kept me busy in the days when I didn't have so much work. And I was a copywriter anyway, so writing was the thing I was doing. It was my trade. So it was just like applying my skills, such as they were, to a creative thing rather than something that had been commissioned from a company. So yeah, I've always loved words, but I didn't have the time to use them for myself until relatively recently.
But you've always been a wordsmith, even if you weren't always writing.
Yeah, I've always been a huge reader, even when I wasn't a big writer. So yeah.
And why crime in particular? What first attracted you to this genre?
Well, I think crime's a very good genre to write because there's such a big readership for it. So that's the sort of purely sort of commercial answer. But actually, I think every reader is drawn to a mystery of some kind. I think as humans we're drawn to mysteries, basically because we're very, very nosy. So we always want to know what happened, and we always want to know other people's secrets. It's a human thing. So I think any book has to have that sort of engine room in it, that you want to keep reading it for a certain reason. And a book that's built around a plot or a secret or a mystery or a crime has got that natural engine room in it. So it's got the momentum of the plot, and it keeps you wanting to know what happened, just, as I say, out of pure curiosity, if nothing else. So I think that's the biggest answer. The other one is that I love reading crime myself, and they always say that you should write what you love to read. So I think that's right, because I mean, for example, I couldn't write science fiction or romance because I don't read them, and I don't understand why people read them. I can't sort of work out what the pleasure is thereafter. So I can't replicate that because I don't know what it is. Whereas I know exactly what I want out of a crime book. So I know exactly what I want to try to replicate for the reader on the page. So it makes sense.
But there is the odd hint of romance in your work.
Yeah, but it's not the whole thing. No. I don't mind doing a bit here and there, but I don't think I'm up to writing a full-scale romance.
And they don't always walk off into the sunset either.
No, well, that's life, isn't it? That's the way it tends to work.
And why police procedural in particular, as opposed to thrillers or psychological thrillers? Or
That's a very good question, and it wasn't a conscious decision on my part. When I sat down to write Close to Home, the first one, I didn't know it was going to be published. I thought I'd be lucky it would be published at all. And I certainly didn't think it was going to turn into a series. I mean, of course not. That's just beyond your sort of comprehension at that stage. And it didn't come to me as a police story. The idea came to me of the twist, which I'm not going to give away if you haven't read it, but if you have, you'll know exactly what I mean. There's a big twist at the end of the book. And that's the idea that came to me first. And then the challenge was to write a story that would lead up to that twist, in which the twist would still be a surprise, but it would also seem natural. Once the reader had read the twist, they would think, yes, it does make sense. And because it's a story about a missing child, then it absolutely necessitated a police angle, because the police are always going to investigate something like that. So the police angle of it was secondary. It was a necessary part of the mechanics, if you like, of the book. It wasn't that I sat down and want to write a police procedural, I want to write a story built around one detective. It was absolutely not that. I was just really lucky that the detective I happened to create as part of that plot turned into somebody who could carry more than one book. But that was luck. That was just pure luck.
So wasn't he even the central character of the book originally in your head, or did that just evolve from the idea? It sort of evolved from the idea.
I wanted lots of different perspectives in the book, so lots of different viewpoints, because I thought that just might be quite an interesting way of doing it, and also because I love crime TV, and I'm a huge Line of Duty fan and all those things, and I think some of the best writing out there now for crime is actually being written for TV. And I just love the way they have the pace in those things. It's very quick. You're intercutting between different perspectives. You're getting lots of short scenes. And as a result of that, I think readers have become even more sophisticated. They can go with a very complex plot, and you don't have to worry about them staying with you. So I thought, well, I'll try and do something a bit like that on the page. So if you've read any of the books, you'll know what I mean. I have lots and lots of very short scenes. I don't have conventional chapters. So there's different perspectives, different so third-person sections, and there's first-person sections, which are written through Adam's eyes, the central detective. So he evolved into one of the main viewpoints of the book, shall we say, even though he may or may not be the main character all the time. In fact, most of the time I quite like to have other perspectives and not just his, so other people in the team, because crime solving in real life is very much a team effort. It's not just, one guy or one guy and a sidekick. So yeah, that's how it evolved anyway.
I want to talk a little bit more about Adam Fawley in a moment, but just to pick up on something that you said there. I mean, to me, reading your books, they do come across as quite filmic, and
Thank you.
and you have got quite a strong sort of ensemble cast. He's not the only person on the stage all the time, it reminds me a little bit in a funny way of sort of the West Wing, only with coppers and set in Oxfordshire, and it's that idea of sort of getting into their heads and the lives of different characters and getting to know all of them. And was that something you deliberately set out to do, or again is it something that just evolved that way?
It evolved that way. Again, I was very lucky with the team, because I put them together for that first book, not knowing whether I'd ever write another one. And as it turned out, they've actually been a really nice mix of people, and they've evolved a bit, and their private lives have evolved. And in later books, I brought in some new characters as well, just to sort of, ginger things up a little bit, because if you have the same team all the time, then the danger is it becomes a bit samey. So I bring in other people, and so the dynamics and the politics start to shift. And it's one of the delights of writing a series, actually. I mean, there are challenges with writing a series, one of which is to keep it fresh and to make sure that they don't start to get, too samey. Use that word again. But the delights of writing a series is that you've already got your setting, and you've already got your characters, and you can dive a bit deeper. And it's lovely when I get feedback from people who say that they love the rest of the team and not just him. That's always a nice thing to hear.
And you can see things that certainly in my case, you can see things that you want to do in the future, but not now.
Yes.
But you can start to lay some breadcrumbs for something
Absolutely.
that might not actually materialise for another 3 books in some
Yes,
cases.
or might not materialise at all.
Or at all, yeah.
Yeah, but they tend to. You'll know this. But before I started writing, and I heard someone say something like this, I always used to think it sounded bonkers. But your characters do actually take on a life of their own, and people look at you and think, "That's mad. They're in your head. They don't have a life of their own. You've made them up." But they do. If it's always a good sign that the book is going well when you're writing. If something sort of evolves in a character's life that you didn't even know, or didn't expect, and that's happened to me a few times, and that's always such a good sign, because
Yes.
it just knows the thing is holding together.
And if you try and make them do something they wouldn't do, they soon tell you.
It just doesn't work, and you end up writing yourself into a cul-de-sac. Yeah.
Fawley himself, let's explore him a little bit more. He comes across to me as a very well-rounded character. He's not the cliched fictional copper at all. He's not always blind drunk. He's not a chain smoker.
Doesn't like jazz.
He's not doing drugs. He's not got a gambling habit. He's happily married, and he's a good husband with a strong marriage. He's a decent boss. He's obviously got a few secrets rattling around. You want to tell us any more about him?
Well, that's I wouldn't mind being described like that. I think that's pretty good. I mean, he's not perfect. So you can't have a perfect character; they're boring. So he's got quite a short temper, and he's, as you say, he's had some sad things happen in his life, and his family life from when he was growing up wasn't entirely easy either. But yes, I just wanted someone who was not like the sort of maverick stereotype. I mean, there are some people who've written fabulous versions of the maverick stereotype, so don't get me wrong, they can work really well, but we've had a lot of them now, so I just wanted someone who was a bit different. And then there's something that's interesting, perhaps that you might want to know, was when I first wrote the book, first one, Close to Home, and I was thinking, gosh, there are so many fabulous books out there, so many crime books, you know, the shelves are stacked with them. How am I going to make this thing stand out? How am I going to do something that's going to catch a publisher's eye? So what I actually did, and the version that went to publishers was written this way, the central character of the book, the detective, I never said which gender they were, because they started out being called Chris, which obviously could be a man or a woman. And their partner was Alex, which has remained, and Alex can also be a man or a woman. So it could have either been a man and a woman, or a woman and a man, or two guys, or two girls. And I wrote the entire book without pronouns. Can you imagine how difficult that was? So the team couldn't call them sir, you know, they had to call them boss and stuff, you know, so I wrote the whole book that way, and it was incredibly difficult, just technically, but it was also very interesting because it meant that Adam's, the character who is now Adam, had to have quite a pronounced female side, you know, had to be, in a way, so shall we say, intuitive, and not quite, you know, not a sort of male stereotype or indeed a female one. So I think that's actually helped with the development of his character, because a lot of that original work is still there. So the Adam we have now has still got a lot of that original character. But it was quite interesting when we went to, my agent and I went to publishers with the first version, so the androgynous one. And it was fascinating sitting down with editors, you know, professional readers, seriously experienced people, and saying to me, I love this central female character. And I'm going, no. And they said, no, it's a woman. I said, I think I know, you know. I think I'm the one who knows. And so it was absolutely fascinating that certain people read it without even realising that was what I had done, and read it in a certain way, which I thought was just really revealing and interesting. And my editor now, Katie at Penguin, when they bought it, she said, look, it's really interesting as a gimmick, but you're never going to be able to keep it up for more than one book. So you're just going to have to decide, is it a man or is it a woman? And then just go with that, and it's fine. You can choose whichever you want. So I went with the man, and I went with changed his name to Adam, and Alex just stayed Alex, but became a woman. So we got a conventional married couple there. But yeah, it was a very interesting experiment just to try to do it.
I guess that would have been torpedoed as soon as TV rights started being discussed as well.
Yeah, exactly. But of course, I didn't even dream of TV at that stage, so I didn't even think that one through. You're quite right.
We might come back to that in a moment. I'd like to talk about Oxford, because, again, like me, you set your police series in the area of the world where you actually live. And there is a strong sense of place, there's a strong sense specifically of Oxford in your books. But it's not the slightly glossy Oxford of the Inspector Morse books. It's probably on balance more sort of town than gown, I'd say. And was it a conscious decision to try and make it like that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm the biggest Morse fan, so I'll say that straight away. And I grew up with them, loved them. But they are quite chocolate boxy. I mean, even at the time that the first Morses were made in the 90s, that was still quite a sort of golden view of the city. I mean, I was there at the university in the 80s, and it didn't really match with what the town was really like, even then, and certainly not now. And the other thing about it is that I wanted to do something different. I mean, I did start by disguising the fact that it was Oxford in the first version, so it was called something else, because I thought everyone's had far too much Oxford crime. And the first thing Penguin said was, no, it's Oxford, turn it back to Oxford. So I did. Obviously didn't disguise it very well, did I? But it's a great boon to me as a writer, because it means that every reader knows what I'm talking about. I don't have to describe the town and all these foreign editions, all the readers overseas. They know what it looks like too, so it's a great gift to be able to set your book in a very well-known city because of the TV series. But I always wanted to just look at the rest of the city, And I try actually actively to avoid storylines set in the colleges. The most recent one, The Whole Truth, is looking at the Me Too movement and sexual harassment, sexual politics, and it made sense to set that in a college for all sorts of reasons. It would have been a bit difficult to have tried to find another place to do that in the same way. So I did set that. That does have a university angle, but even so not in one of the more conventional older colleges in the centre of town, which is sort of Morse territory really. So yeah, I suppose I stand in the centre of town but look outwards. So I look sort of north to North Oxford where I live. I look out towards Cowley, down the Abingdon Road, out towards Botley. So I'm looking at the interlocking communities around the centre of the town, which are very interesting in their own right and quite distinctive, like a little series of villages, really, even though it's actually a very small geographical space. And that's where where the overlaps are, is where all the stories start to evolve. Well, I think.
Yes, it's interesting. We met on our holiday. We met somebody who's an artist who works with glass, and she's from Oxford, and there's a whole little community where she lives. I can't think where it actually is, but there's a whole little community where she lives where they do all this artistry, and you go there to see their exhibitions. And you can sort of see that it's that sort of place, you know. Yeah. As you say, it's fascinating that the city actually divides a lot more into different quarters than you'd imagine. Yes, and I do like the way that comes off of your page. But you very conveniently started talking about The Whole Truth, which is a great read, by the way, and I totally recommend it. But say a little bit more about the book and what it's all about.
It starts with an allegation of sexual assault by a student about their professor, but it's crucially what's different about this is it's the opposite way round that you'd expect, in that the student is a very strapping rugby-playing man, and the professor is a woman. So immediately we're looking at an upside-down version of the normal or the more conventional way in which these things tend to play out. And that was quite deliberate, because often with the books I like to look at topical issues, contemporary issues, but I like to look at them from a different angle or come at them in a slightly different way. And doing it that way round meant that I was able to look at some of these issues quite differently, and it was very interesting to explore how the police team responded to that as well, because clearly that was it does happen. You can have sexual assault allegations against women by men, but it's pretty rare, though it does happen. But it obviously was something that they hadn't come across, so they were having to challenge their own preconceptions as well as part of that, and it became like conventional sexual assault allegations often are, which is he said, she said, who do you believe? Because there's no independent evidence. So the idea of truth, which is in the title, is sort of embedded in the book, really. Who is telling the truth? What is the truth? And as we discover, it's far more complicated than how you could possibly imagine at the beginning as to what's really been going on. And at the same time, that's the main story that starts the book off, but then there's another one that comes through later, which involves Adam himself, but I won't say too much about that because I'll be going into spoiler territory.
But yeah, I mean, there are quite a few plot strands being carried by this book, possibly slightly more than previous work of yours that I've read. Do you do a lot of plotting and planning to make all that hang together, or do you let it sort of carry you along and you somehow get it all in your head?
Oh no, I'm a terrible planner. I think my books tend to start, if I'm lucky, with about a paragraph idea, which is where I sort of bounce it off my agent and my editor, so it's all the big idea in a paragraph, and then that'll grow to about 2 pages. And then, if we're all happy with that, it just grows and grows and grows. So my synopses before I start can be 30, 40 pages long. So I get to the point where I'm actually doing blocking scenes out. They would, though, only tend to be the main crime story bits. Things like the domestic scenes at home with the team, they don't feature at that stage because I put those in later. But the actual crime story, the sort of who, what, when, where and how bit of the whole thing, and why as well, motives, that all has to go down in a pretty solid scaffolding before I start, because I do know one of my friends who's a crime writer in Oxford says, oh, I just get a sort of a vague idea of a theme, I just sit down and write, and I just go, oh, I just don't know how you could do that. I mean, I can see how you could do that with some types of literary fiction, where it might just be exploring an idea or something, but with crime, I mean, I don't know how you write without knowing who did it and how they did it and why they did it and what your ending's going to look like. I mean, hats off to someone who can do that without planning it all out, but I'm not one of them.
Did you see, it was years ago now, there was a documentary about the mystery writer Minette Waters,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't know if you saw it, but
No. I love that stuff.
she never knows how her book ends when she starts writing it. And,
Wow.
and the camera's sort of on her, and she's saying, I'm quite worried. I've got about 10,000 words of this book still to write, and my agent's coming to see how it's doing, and I still don't know who did the murder. And I'm like, really?
I just don't know how you could do that. Partly because the amount of time she must have spent to get to that point. If she's only got 10,000 left, she's been writing for months. And she, what happens if she can't actually make the ending work? I mean, it's so much effort that will have got into it.
This must be the point when the agent is climbing the wall as well.
I can imagine.
But do you find that your plan pretty well survives for first contact with the enemy of actually sitting down to write the book?
Usually, I mean, there's some things that will turn up, and you have to be flexible because, as we said earlier, your characters can suddenly start doing something that you weren't expecting. So I'm always open to playing with it a bit, and also, I'm sure when you do this, sometimes something that you had a sort of rough idea of, when you actually get to the nitty-gritty of writing a sentence, then another sentence, then another sentence, it actually becomes a bit more complicated. And you realise, that's not quite working the way I thought it was going to. And you can only know that by actually writing it. But most of the time, they're broadly, I mean, the big scaffolding of who, what, when, where, and how is still in place, even if bits of that have modified a bit. But I've never changed who the murderer was for a start. I mean, that, if there is a murderer, and they don't have murders, but no, that's never happened. I mean, I just don't see how you could write a book and not know who it was going to be.
And are you doing all the research at the planning stage, or are you doing it as you go along, or a bit of both?
A bit of both. And I have a wonderful team of advisors now, which is fabulous. So there's a detective inspector and a criminal psychologist and a QC and a CSI. And he's the one I talk to start with. Because all the rest, I can sort of wing it with a bit of internet research and then go back and tinker later if I need to. But the thing these days, and I know you'll know this, you've got to get your forensics right up front, because if you can come up, in all innocence, come up with what you think is a fabulous idea. You think, yeah, that's great, and sort of put it all together, and a competent CSI will walk into the room and say, well, that's what happened, because the science is so good now that to find a way of putting a plot together that keeps suspense going for any length of time and will fool or just get round a competent CSI team. It's really hard.
Tame CSI is really worth the weight in gold.
Yeah, so he's the only one. I mean, I don't bother the others because they're all very busy people, and especially don't want to bother a detective inspector with nitty-gritty stuff. He reads it once it's at first draft stage and we just tinker. But the CSI guy, and he's brilliant and terrifying in both measures, but I sit down with him and say, look, this is what I want to do. Will it work? And I always say the best bit is when I've come up with something and I've researched it a bit online, but I need to check it with him. And this happened with The Whole Truth, actually. There's a forensics sort of crux in that one, something the whole plot sort of works around. And I remember saying to him, this is what I want to do. I can't find it anywhere online as whether it's actually happened, but what do you think? And there was silence at the other end of the phone for a minute, and then he said, yeah, you could do that. And I thought, oh, yeah, there was a wonderful moment where if he says, I've never seen it either, but you could. So that was great.
I love that. You really put Fawley through the ringer in this one as well, don't you?
I do, poor man.
I mean, I've heard other authors say they get really attached to their characters, and if they do bad things to them, it makes them feel bad. Are you one of those? Or
Yeah, I do. I mean, Adam and Alex have had a lot of heartache in the last few years, both just before the books start and in the course of the series. So I do want to sort of try and be a bit kinder to them, I think, because they have been through quite a lot. But yes, it's you get so close to somebody. I mean, I can almost hear his voice in my head now, because particularly since I write his stuff in the first person, so it's almost, you know, like I'm writing it in a weird way. I'm like a ventriloquist for him. So yes, you do end up feeling their pain in a strange way.
But you do it anyway.
I know, yes. Well, you wouldn't be a crime writer if you weren't prepared to do
Is there a
that.
slightly gleeful writerly pleasure as well?
I'm not going to admit to that one.
And the books are quite gritty, and they often don't pull any punches. They frequently don't pull any punches, actually. I mean, do you find some of the stuff that you write hard to write?
Yeah, especially if it involves children.
Yeah.
So I do have quite a lot of children who are, for want of a better phrase, collateral damage in the books. They're not the designed victims, but they often get, you know, swept up in what's going on. And unfortunately, that's what happens. I mean, if you're trying to write realistic crime, the crime that you see most of around us is crime that tends to be a result of relationship breakdown, dysfunctional families, people put in impossible situations and making bad choices. You know, we've all seen the sort of serial killer things, and yes, those things do happen, but they're vanishingly unlikely in most people's lives. The sort of crime that we're more likely to be affected by or see happening around us is sort of, as it were, mundane crimes, which can still end up in terrible, terrible situations, and children are often part of that. So I don't do that gratuitously or deliberately or to shock. When I write about that, it's because it's what happens. But it is very difficult to write. It's very, very painful. I've been in tears writing some of the things I've written, and I know some of the readers have too. But in a way, I hope that's a tribute to the fact that the writing makes that feel real to them.
Well, yeah, I think, you know, when somebody contacts me and says, "Oh, you know, this scene that you wrote to, you know, made me cry," and it does, doesn't it? It makes you sort of, I won't say proud, but you feel that it's a bit of a tribute and a compliment, don't you?
Yes, that you have to hope that that's because the writing has done something that's touched them, and that's what you're there to do.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Let's move away from emotion. We'll talk about a different emotion. You must be absolutely thrilled about the TV rights
Yes.
being acquired. How did that come about?
Well, I have my literary agent, as everybody tends to these days, to sell the books to publishers and do the foreign rights. And part of that is they have a partnership with sort of film and TV agents. So they're the ones who will then go and talk to production companies. I mean, I didn't know very much about how this whole world worked at all before this, but the way it works is the production company will acquire the rights, and then they will have to find a network. So they'll have to find either, say, a conventional network like ITV or BBC, or these days Netflix or Amazon or wherever. So they will have to find the network, because the production company won't just make it, because they don't have the money to do that. The money comes from the partnership with the network, who will invest in it. So that's how it works. So we're, as it were, halfway there. And then we've done the first bit, but we don't yet have the network. But that sort of thing, they keep saying to me, look, it takes ages. So you can't afford to become too impatient with this stuff, because these things do sort of go through immense numbers of processes, and a lot of people have to be involved to make decisions in TV network companies. So, and with lockdown as well, I mean, everything's going at half the pace it would normally anyhow. So it's not a definite, and I'm not in any way complacent about it. It might not happen, but we're halfway there.
I know from a very good friend of mine who writes romantic comedy, and she was having a sitcom made by the BBC, and it never happened. And it took years to not happen. And one of the problems with, I don't know if it's the same with the company that you're involved with, but one of the problems with the BBC is that the people that have been cast and it's not happening have now got jobs making something else, so you have to recast it, and by the time you recast it, the person who was the driving force behind it has moved on to another job, so you have to get another producer involved, and so it goes on.
The complexity is immense, and so luckily I don't have to be part of that. I just sort of get on with it and create some raw material for them.
Have you got any thoughts who you'd like to play Fawley, though?
Everybody asks me that. I have a sneaking, it's not that sneaking because I've said it in public, but a sneaking sort of dream that it might be Richard Armitage, but I can't afford to get too sort of fixated on any one person because it's almost certainly going to be somebody else. So.
Interesting choice, though.
Well, he looks the same way as Fawley is described, and he's got that sort of quiet power about him, if that makes sense, sort of quiet strength. He's not flashy, which is, and that's not the word you'd ever apply to Adam. So.
No, you're right.
Yeah.
Have to wait and see.
Well, you never know if he's listening.
What's next in the pipeline?
Another Fawley book. One's coming out spring next year, I think, called Come to Harm. And then I don't know. We'll see.
Can you give us any sort of hints as to what that one's going to be about?
Come to Harm is actually, I mean, a lot of my books start with, or as a springboard, a true crime case. So, for example, In the Dark, the second one starts with a girl being found in a basement in North Oxford, and obviously that had the sort of the stirrings of that idea were in the terrible Joseph Fritzl case in Austria, when that man who imprisoned his daughter in a basement for 18 years or something dreadful. So that's the sort of the seed of that idea. This one that's coming is taking a real life crime, but I've drawn quite a lot more from this one, but I'm not going to say what it is because it will give too much away, but it's drawn from an absolutely extraordinary real life crime, which obviously I have changed. It's not that crime, it's my story, not theirs, but it does draw a lot on it because it is just so fascinating and such an extraordinary case.
We'll have to wait and see. Looking forward to that.
Thank you.
Any thoughts about a standalone or a new series?
I'd love to write a standalone. Yeah, I would love to write a standalone. Not because I don't want to write any more Fawleys, quite the opposite. I do want to write more Fawleys, but they're by necessity only in Oxford, and they're by necessity the same team. So if I come up, I haven't got one yet really, but if I came up with an idea that didn't work in Oxford, didn't work as a police procedural, then I'd love to write it. So yes, I'm completely open to doing that. And in a way, I think it would probably be quite a good thing for the Fawley series, actually. It's, you know what it's like, do something else for a bit and then you go back to what you were doing before with some renewed energy and new ideas. So I don't think it would be a bad thing. But I'm definitely not giving up on Adam until people want me to stop. And when they want me to stop, then I'll stop.
Yes, or maybe, I mean, I've got a sneaking feeling my characters will tell me when it's time to.
Yeah, that's,
to
you know, don't you? You
Yeah.
just know if you're writing a series. You know when, okay, I'm just going to pause it there for a bit and then, yeah.
I think we've got time for some questions. Do we have any questions for Cara? That went well, didn't it?
Don't worry, it's always a terrible moment when people don't have questions. It's fine.
Let me chuck another one at you then.
Okay.
And going back to lockdown, we know that people read a lot more in lockdown because they partly because they didn't have anything else to do, but partly probably because they were readers and they maybe finding time to discover new things. But we also know that crime still continues to be the best-selling genre, and I sort of sometimes wondered, that at a particularly horrible time, people deciding the best escape is into murder and mayhem.
Well, I think it is escapism to some degree. I think for a lot of people, and I don't mean this in a bad way at all. I mean in a positive way. It's comfort reading. They know that in most crime books it's going to come right in the end. So in a way, that's actually quite comforting when the world around you is completely, everything's different and completely thrown up in the air and all the bits have come down in the wrong places and you think, what is going on? To go into a crime book where you know what the universe is actually like and it plays by the rules in a way that, your everything about normal life is no longer playing by the rules. It can be quite comforting, I think, to do that, to go to crime. I think that the sad thing about lockdown was that debut writers really struggled because it's very difficult to launch books without events like this. If you're a debut, people don't know who you are. Launching a debut book with no events, with no bookshops open, no festivals. I felt really, really sad for debut writers who were trying to come out in lockdown. Whereas people who are a bit more established, I think, did quite well because people were thinking, oh yes, I'll read another one of theirs, or I've heard good things about this, so in that sense, I think it worked quite well. But the other question I keep getting asked, we were talking about it earlier with Ben, is are you going to write a book set in lockdown? Short answer, no. Because I don't know about you, but as soon as this is over, I never want to hear another word about it. I mean, I certainly don't want to read a book set in it, and I don't want to put a book in it. And certainly with Fawley, the Fawley books are still only in 2018. So by the time I get to 2020, it'll be long gone. And the last thing anyone's going to want to read about, if you ask me, anyway, if I'm going by my own judgment, I don't think people are going to want to read about lockdown. Though it would, in theory, throw up all sorts of wonderful crime scenarios. Lockdown finally lifted, police find a body, how long has it been there, who are they? You can see straight away, can't you, that lockdown would set up a whole load of quite interesting scenarios, but I just couldn't
It did cross my mind, it must have crossed yours as well, that there was a lot of opportunity in lockdown for people to get away with things because nobody was out on the street.
Nobody was out on the street, and if somebody had gone into somebody's house, and you weren't allowed to go in and sort of have a nose. I can absolutely see how it would be a scenario, but
none of us want to touch it.
I just don't want to touch it. I really don't. I'm so bored with it. I don't know about anybody else. I just want to.
But Archer and Baines are in 2019, and I'm now writing Quarrel Book 2, so I can sort of skip them forward to a certain extent when I get back to them. But
yeah, exactly.
It depends really how long this nonsense finishes up going on, because you don't want your characters to have aged like 4 years in real time.
Oh please, not 4 years.
By the time we finally take the masks off.
No, I read a book recently, the first time, the new Curran Slaughter, which they sent me, and it's the first one that I'd read with any sort of reference to it. And it was slightly strange because obviously she'd had to write that long before she wouldn't have known what the situation was going to be like when it came out. So she couldn't possibly have known, as it were, seen into the future as to what the world was going to look like then. So she's got various things happening, like people putting on masks and stuff, and it's just really odd. I mean, she does it well, don't get me wrong, but it's just really weird to read about it because it sort of came out of nowhere in the book. Suddenly there's a reference to putting on masks, which I thought, so I think that's part of the problem as well. You don't know, looking forwards how it's going to pan out. But let's hope we're out of it quicker than 4 years anyway.
I think so, yeah. Otherwise we're going to have some long, wrinkly, bearded characters by the time we finally get back to them. And you can only have so much 2018 in your books as well.
Yeah, I'm getting away with it still in the one I've just written. That's still in 2018. So I've got a way to go. Yeah, I could have at least 2 books set in 2019 before I have to worry about this.
There's 2 questions. Sandra first.
I just wondered how disciplined you are in terms of your writing. Do you have a routine? Writing, or do you procrastinate and only really get going when a deadline is looming?
Yes, well, having been a copywriter, deadlines are something I got really used to, and actually quite useful as well, and that they sort of keep you going. I'm pretty disciplined. So I work from about 9:30 till about 2 or 3, and then I stop because I get tired, and I tend to find I'm not writing very good stuff if I write too late into the afternoon. And every morning I go back through what I did the night before, the day before, and do a bit of quick editing at that stage, and then start. So it's all like 1 step forward, 1 step back, 3 steps forward, hopefully. And it was really dreary in lockdown. It was just like, ploughing through treacle really all the time. Actually, the book itself, when I've gone back and now done my first edits, that's actually all right. I'm really pleased with it, but it didn't feel like it. It was not the pleasure that I'm sure you know on this slide. It was not the pleasure that previous books have been to write, just because of what was going on around. But yeah, I'm quite disciplined. I always meet my deadlines, but that's the copywriter in me, so my editor likes me.
Harriet.
Oh, I was just going to say, Cara, I really love your books. I've read all of them, apart from this latest one, which I'm looking forward to. But I'm a big fan of crime fiction generally, and I'd be really interested to hear if you had any recommendations, like what other series do you like reading?
Well, here's a quick plug, if you'll forgive me. I do a newsletter which is completely free, which you can sign up to, and I do recommendations every time. So I usually do 3 books and something on screen each time. But I mean, there are so many good things out there at the moment. We're in a really sort of wonderful sort of era of crime fiction writing, and it's so fantastic that so many of them are women as well. It's just brilliant. But I love Shari Lapina's books. I don't know if you've read her. So they're not a series. She's Canadian, and she's really lovely. She's such a nice person, and she has a cat. So we sort of talk about cats. It's a cat thing. She's fabulous. What else have I read recently? I've just read the new Joseph Knox, which is called True Crime Story. So he does a bit of what I do as well, where he's bringing in documents and emails and stuff like that. He's done a series before, the Aidan Waits trilogy, and now this is a standalone for him. So his stuff's really good. My brain's blanking now, so everything else. But if you want to sign up to the newsletter, then you'll get them every time. And the other one I've just read, which I really like, is the new Olivia Kiernan. Now that's a series as well. She lives in Oxford, so I know her quite well, but she sets her stuff in Dublin, which is where she comes from. And the most recent one, which is coming out soon, I think, which is called The Murder Box, which is really clever setup where the detective, hers is a woman, gets sent this sort of murder mystery game in a box, which has got loads of bits in it, and you're supposed to start working out, what happened. Only it turns out it's a real crime, not just a game. So it's a really good setup, and she does it really well. So yeah, I'd recommend that as well.
Gentleman from.
Yes, I'd like to ask you, your character in Detective Inspector Fawley, have you ever thought yet, or have you ever crossed your mind that he's based in Oxford, and that's the area. Have you ever thought of what he was like before he became a detective inspector, or possibly a policeman? What were the motives, and setting a crime story in which he's a character, might be a policeman or not, and possibly in Oxford or wherever you grew up. Have you ever thought of doing anything?
Like a prequel.
Almost, yes. Yes.
I've never thought of it, but I see what you mean. I mean, we've got a few more things about his childhood as the series has gone along, and funnily enough, quite a bit about his childhood is actually drawn from my own. So he was brought up in a northwest London suburb, same as me. So elements of him come from me, not everything by any means, but the same sort of idea of trying to break away from where you originally came from and find just your own life somewhere else. I mean, that's certainly part of it. But yes, the decision to become a detective, I haven't really explored that one, though. Perhaps I should, actually. It's a good idea. Thank you.
Any more? I think in that case we'll call that it. Cara, thank you so much for
My pleasure.
coming.
The first time to be with real people. It's been brilliant. Thank you all for coming.
Yes, thank you all. And we'll be over at the bookstall in a moment signing some books for you.